So now that we've both had a chance to use the Lumix G9 Mark II for a few more things, thought we'd do a little update, talk about it, see how it's faring compared to the GH6 and everything else you use.
I would say that the focus is great. The Other than that, I don't know. I still think like the GH6 is still such a strong camera, but if you didn't already have one, it might be worth it just to go straight to the G9 Mark II. Because yeah, the phase detect autofocus is really nice. I was just shooting some animals, some dogs, perfect focus the whole time. But aside from that, I think the GH6 is still pretty strong, especially if you're used to shooting manual focus, let's say.
Which, I mean, I've talked about this in a couple videos, but even when I'm manually focusing, I'm not manual focusing. You do this all the
Right.
time on the
Yes.
GH5,
Yeah.
even still to this day, using that back focus button, using autofocus to set your focus, and then
Yes.
you kind of switch back to manual, but you're not really tracking usually often with it.
It's, well,
I don't know how to
especially with,
describe that concept.
yes, just acquiring focus is a lot quicker if you have like an autofocus lens. I would say like my style probably lends itself better to like cinema glass where it's like 1 to 1, right? Like as you're focusing, it's like that is exactly like I complain to you a lot with some of those lenses where you have to like dial it in like in camera because it wants to, I don't know. I don't even know how that really works, but it's not 1 to 1, right? It's like you have to adjust. So it's like depending on how much you want the throw to be for focus, you can adjust that.
Yeah, so there's I forget what it's called, the linear focus, basically. The old Micro Four Thirds cameras would all like the speed at which
Yeah.
you move the ring would change how the distance that it would focus. It was super annoying. And then
Yes.
they finally switched it to either linear or non-linear. I forget which is the correct term. And that you can change the amount of rotation.
Yeah.
But even then, it's still not quite the same as a true manual focus cinema lens
Yes.
where you're actually turning the focusing mechanism, where all these other ones are kind of focused by wire.
There's something to be said about using those lenses because there is that muscle memory. So if you're used to using like true like manual focus lenses, you get acquired to that. But then of course, adjusting the camera depending on which lens you have can get annoying. But for the most part, if yeah, like what you're saying, use that back button to focus, then you can pretty much acquire focus really quickly and then do like a small adjustment if you need to.
Because that's the biggest thing I've noticed about the G9 Mark II is that I'm using autofocus a lot more, and it is good. I would say it's not as good as Sony because I've kind of done some A/B testing between just product shots. So with that tabletop setup that I have, using the Sony, it knows the distance a lot better than the G9 Mark II. The G9 Mark II is good for face detection and animal and that kind of thing. But even when I'm holding objects up, it's still not really knowing how close something is, and it kind of focuses on the wrong part of the object sometimes. So it's not as good as the Sony system, but it's much better than the other Lumix cameras from the past that were contrast only. But then I was thinking about it, using autofocus on the G9 Mark II, relying on it a lot more, and then thinking, well, shoot, I wasn't really manually focusing a lot on the GH6. I was still using autofocus, but in more of these bursts where I'd
Right.
set my focus using the back button autofocus. Because I was thinking, I'm like, how would I have done this before? And it's like, oh yeah, it's the muscle memory of just pushing the back button, setting your focus, and then you have it. And having to do that now on the G9 Mark II, where I have to switch out of
Yeah, it's
autofocus
pretty
into
much-
manual
yeah.
focus just so that I can
almost like backwards.
use autofocus to set it every once in a while. It's just an interesting paradigm shift where I don't know, we were talking a while ago about film cameras and actual manual focus where you didn't have any,
Right.
punch in or anything. But even there were the tricks of, I don't know if you've seen it on that camera. There's a prism or something in the viewfinder that will let you kind of, if you line the lines up correctly, that's you're in focus.
Right.
And so even on some old vintage film camera, there's still the little helpful techniques, the little tricks to help you out. And we've been living with that for so long. And I'm kind of, when people say that the autofocus on the Lumix camera sucks, it's like, yeah, it does. If you're relying on it 100% to do all of the work for you.
Right.
But there's so many shortcuts that the G9 Mark II, you don't really need to do anymore. But it still was like, it was totally manageable before as well. So if you had to go with a GH6 or even a GH5, there's still lots of ways to work with it, even though it doesn't have perfect autofocus.
Yeah, and depending on the lens too, we use a lot of wide lenses, so kind of knowing the distance that somebody is and even reading your lens, like it will tell you like obviously like how many feet right away, your subject would be from your sensor to be in focus. And for the most part, if you're using a wide enough lens, a lot will be in focus. So if you're in the ballpark, no one's really going to be able to tell if it is truly like critical focus. So I would say, yeah, wide lenses probably a lot easier. So you don't really have to like depend maybe on autofocus as much because you can kind of do it manually. And I do like how on the GH6, I can have like my separate monitor, but on the like actual camera LCD, when I do just barely even touch the manual focus, it'll punch in for me so I can do like a critical focus check while I'm still rolling, which is great. That was like one of the things I really liked jumping up from the GH5 to the GH6. But then now with the G9 Mark II, it's like, well, it's already tracking. I can see that it's tracking. And then like you were saying, you'd have to switch it out of autofocus in order to do, manual focus because like you said, like objects, very difficult for it to know like what you are trying to focus
which
on,
part,
especially if you have like a zone focus, which I typically have done when I was using Sony, right? And doing, I don't know, I guess shooting longer lenses, it's a lot easier for any camera body to pick up a face because you have that separation, right? But again, if you're shooting wide and then it's like, well, what am I trying to focus on really? Especially if you're going like close up with a wide angle lens, then switching back to manual focus is probably going to be your best bet. So you don't have it, searching.
Yeah, that's the worst part of autofocus is when it breaks, it's very noticeable and looks really bad. You were talking about some adapter to use some other lenses, some like EF lenses. So I tried the Metabone speed booster on the G9 Mark II, and that speed booster, gosh, is almost probably 10 years old. It's been a while. Doesn't work with the EF lenses. So I tried the Sigma 18 to 35 because someone was curious about autofocus and with, adapted lenses and all that. And I couldn't get it to work, but have you tried anything with your other lenses?
Well, I saw are you talking about the other adapter? You mentioned the Voltrex adapter.
Viltrox, I think.
Viltrox.
I don't have one. So
again, I haven't used it in years. Like you even mentioned, like I haven't used these in years, which same, but you mentioning it, I was like, oh yeah, I do have that adapter. Because at the time I was on this quest to like get my longest lens adapted to my micro four thirds because of that 2x adapter. I think I was trying to get my 70 to 200 EF lens adapted, and I had dummy adapters, which is great, but you still have manual focus to deal with, and on that lens specifically, there's no way to change the aperture because like there's no like aperture ring on it, right? So it's very difficult. Either you had to set it on your camera, your Canon body, and then hold that extra buttons to the like lock of the aperture and then twist it off.
All the tricks.
Yeah. So that is like a $4,000 roundabout solution if you want to change your aperture. So I was like, what's the cheaper option? So I found this Voltrox adapter. I do have it. I can let you borrow it for a test. But it does work, and essentially what it is it's not a dummy adapter, but comparing it to like a Metabones, there's no glass inside of it.
Oh, okay.
So it's an adapter that just has the autofocus like connector pins basically. So you can still use your contrast-based autofocus, which is good and bad. I kind of just realized immediately that I was like, this is nice, but you can still just manual focus. So depending really what you're doing, and what I was doing was just landscape photography at the time. So it's nice. It works. Like you can, acquire focus. But then if you're like me, you're still going to like double tap in just to make sure. So I'm like, what's the point? Like I could have just left it. But yeah, it is a cool adapter. It's nice. It's convenient when it works.
Yeah, I was never interested in anything that was taking full frame glass and adapting it to, mirrorless, micro four thirds, whatever, because I don't want the size of full frame glass. That's the whole point of the smaller sensor, right? So
instead of buying other glass,
of course, if it's already in your collection, it's a way to make it work. But over the years, it was okay. How do I get the best image? And that Sigma 18 to 35, very popular lens. It's an APS-C lens, so Super 35. I think it's actually that lens right there. That lens. That lens is the 18 to 35. But again, why would I take an APS-C lens and use it on Micro Four Thirds unless I'm getting that wider field of view?
Who would do that?
So using a speed booster, that's what I've always wanted. If I can get the wider field of view, then I'll gladly use a slightly bigger lens. But then even over time, dealing with autofocus not being perfect and the speed booster being, it was good, but there's better image quality from native glass if you're using something like the 10 to 25. So once I bought that 10 to 25, the speed booster, the 18 to 35, it all kind of went in the closet for a while. Yeah. And now finding new reasons to bring it all back and have fun with it. But the 18 to 35 doesn't get a lot of use on the GH6 or the G9 Mark II for me. It's the 10 to 25, and that lens works great.
One of the reasons why you would want like a full frame glass, for instance, especially if you're looking at adapters, and I had a lot of fun finding tilt shift adapters. So using full frame on especially like a tilt shift adapter, you do have that extra wiggle room, especially when you are like shifting the image. So in that case, it is good to have the bigger glass because then you can kind of play around with and almost make new lenses, right? Because tilt shift lenses are expensive to begin with. So if you already have a collection of lenses, so I have these Rokinon lenses that they all pretty much lend themselves really well to any of those kinds of adapters. So I had a bit of fun with that as well. Again, this was years ago when I used to play with all these adapters, but now there's really no reason to. A lot of the work we do now are more like docu style, and I don't really have time to play with any of those adapters. But I did enjoy doing like architecture stuff with tilt shift lenses, and then there was maybe like one shot that I really enjoyed, but I just never had time to do since then. And it's just like an establishing shot of a building using a tilt shift lens, because that's how you do it properly with like architecture photography, but it's very rarely seen in video. So if you can pull it off, it has that like weird look of like, this looks different. But I don't know, I've always enjoyed using those kinds of adapters because you just get to have fun with, legacy lenses, and they never really die,
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I invested a lot in Nikon lenses back in the day, and even manual EF lenses from Rokinon or Samyang or any of those brands. With the G9 Mark II, have you heard of USB PD?
No.
Doesn't ring a bell? Didn't for me either. I haven't heard of this. USB PD. Any guesses?
Police department of the USB.
USB PD. USB PD. PD stands for power delivery, and it's a USB rating for 9 volts and above. It basically delivers more power over USB-C, the standard connector you're familiar with, but actually supplies the right amount of voltage for devices like laptops and cameras as well. So apparently I've been having issues on the G9 Mark II with the USB charging. I've shown you many a times. I like to charge the internal battery. Works great on the GH6. I tried to do the same technique on the G9 Mark II. Doesn't work at all.
I wonder why.
So I've switched to the dummy battery system where I have the D-tap to the dummy battery internal, but that gives me a little bit of anxiety because if that power gets interrupted, the camera just turns off and I lose the clip or whatever. Someone was saying, and I have to test this myself, the cable has been ordered. USB PD is this new spec, this new standard, and apparently the G9 Mark II can accept it, so you can get a D-tap to USB-C, and that should power and charge up that internal battery.
That makes sense. It just seems like a lot. I remember that one comment on your video that was like, it seems like a lot. Because like you had like wires connected everywhere. It's like I did the same thing.
I did the same thing
without all that.
Without all the junk. Yeah, there's certain situations where you don't need a bunch. I mean, these cameras, if you put a lens on, you put a battery inside and put a memory card in, it does the job.
Oh, yeah.
But we put cages and monitors and all this other stuff on there. And there's certain situations where I want all-day battery. And so I've rigged up things to let me do that. But I was struggling with the G9 Mark II. It's basically the same camera as the GH6. It's kind of my summary. The GH6 is great. The G9 Mark II is basically the same camera plus phase detect, except for this one weird thing that the USB-C port works different. And I
I don't
don't
know.
understand.
Can't
Everything
explain
else about
it.
the camera is the
Can't
same.
explain it.
Except also the notch on the battery door, which we've also talked about.
I wonder if every camera company just has every division in silos. Like, you guys can't talk to this team. You guys can't talk to this team.
Well, and it's weird because if you search USB PD G9 Mark II, you'll find information about it. But in all the reviews and all the documentation, it's something, maybe I missed it, but it just, I hadn't heard about this thing. But if you go on Amazon and
You
you
might
search,
be the only person trying to do it.
well, no, so there's battery banks now that on Amazon, so just a battery brick.
Right.
USB PD rated, so you can charge your laptop, you can do all these cool things with them. And so it is a new spec. I just haven't heard anyone talking about it. So that's why I wanted to talk about it more, so people
Right.
who listen can
Get the
go,
word out.
oh, that's a thing now. Everyone's got to update.
Yeah. I mean, it is nice. I've just never needed to run my camera that long.
Sure, yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
All day. It's nice not having to
Well,
switch
I just did a
batteries.
shoot this morning and I used the dummy battery and it's fine. You just got to be safe. So it's one of those things where, you know, you give someone the camera, they bump the wrong cord and then they go, what happened? Okay. I hate systems like that. They're too risky. It's not idiot proof.
That's why I keep mine streamlined. No extra wires. Just
I'm trying to nitpick you. Do you keep it actually streamlined? Well, there's that goofy thing with the plate. You can't mount it on the tripod.
I can now.
You can now.
I got a new one. It's my favorite plate. So the Kessler crane had I forget like the name of the exact plate, but essentially it's a plate that has like an arc of Swiss, and then there's different lengths, but essentially it has little feet on this plate that you can put on the bottom of your camera, so you can just set it down, and it's fantastic. I was trying to get away from using those rods, those like 15 millimeter cinema rods that people would have on their cameras. So I found this, and it was a great solution. Except
And you had to
the
go
bottom,
with the XL size, right?
Yeah, the XL size.
XL size handled the bigger
great.
lenses. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have one around, but unfortunately, anyways. So Newer came out with one. It's the same exact kind of style, except on the bottom it has like a quarter 20 thread, so I can actually use it for most tripod plates.
Because that was the thing. I'd grab your camera like, okay, I just need to set this up real quick. And you'd be
Yeah.
like, hold on, let me get the
Which is weird
extra
because
piece.
I had to purchase like a handful of adapters. So it was like Arca Swiss to whatever kind of adapter. There was a whole bunch of, it was like a cheese plate adapter, but I don't know. It worked for a while. I mean, I didn't have any issues with it because I had
Right,
all the
'cause you
pieces.
know it, yeah.
But yeah, now there's a newer one. So newer.
Newer.
I don't know how to pronounce
I say newer. They put two E's in there.
newer. I've always said newer, even though it's newer.
Who knows?
Newer. It might be newer.
Do you say aputure? Do you stress the
I say aputure.
aputure?
Aputure.
All these random brands are just
Aputure.
throwing out made up words into their names. Anything else on the G9 Mark II? Surprising, shocking, amazing, terrible. It's basically a GH6, I think.
Yeah, it's basically the same. I do really like the GH6, the LCD flip out more.
Yeah, the flip up's very helpful.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like going back into time. When I pick up the G9 Mark II, I'm like, is this a GH5? So there's that. But I mean, it's little quirks. I don't know. I think I like the GH6 better
What?
still because I've just logged more time with it. I think it just
More
feels
comfortable.
more natural. Yeah.
Okay.
So there is that, but other than that, like I said, it's pretty much the same. Yeah.
There's a few things that I've missed using the G9 Mark II. I missed the audio button.
Audio button's nice.
So
Real
I've
quick to
found
access.
myself reaching for that audio button, like, oh, I need it. Oh, no, I'll go through the menu, which is fine, but it is a thing that's really nice on the GH6. I also feel like the layout, that button layout, it's very similar to Canon, like white balance, ISO.
Yeah.
Like the wheels, the dials, everything's on that right hand. It's very Canon-esque. I'm trying to think of other camera brands that have a similar layout. And using those Sony A7 IVs drives me nuts. Having the menu button on the other side. I think at this point, for the future, Nikon, Sony, Canon, Lumix, all of them should just have
Menu right in the middle of the D-pad.
the right hand layout Every button's right where it's supposed to be. Quick menu. We're getting close. You know, this is the longest thing for Xbox and PlayStation for a while. PlayStation had their, like, oh, we do it a little different. And Xbox basically perfected the controller for video games. And they're like, okay, keep doing your thing. And then PlayStation finally was like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
We'll all be the same now. And I think we're there with cameras. They should all just be the same because there is a preferred, better layout. 4 buttons on a camera. I don't know why these companies keep going, well, use your left hand. No, why? Why am I using my left hand?
Put some buttons on the lens itself, I guess.
I'm fine. You put buttons on the lens, that's fine. But just give me the basics in the right hand. Don't make me use 2 hands.
Yeah.
That's silly.
No. Well, I mean, I used to use the little grip with the little trigger on it. That was nice. It was nice. The only thing I didn't like about it was, like, obviously, like, once you built it out and everything, it was kind of big. Like, the low profileness of not having one's really great. The one thing I did like about it, and one thing that reminded me, especially with the G9 Mark II, is that, like, the G9 Mark II has that little that dial around the shutter. So, like, that gets bumped very easily. So I did notice myself, like, slipping a lot and changing my settings, like my shutter angle and like everything. So that much I did not necessarily like about the G9 Mark II. It's a little bit easier to operate the GH6. You don't necessarily hit anything by accident as much. But that's one thing I appreciated about having that grip. Because once you hit record, it's like then you're just holding on to this, piece of wood basically, and it's just like, okay, I know I'm not going to mess anything up, So I do miss that a little
I
bit.
saw someone, I think they were on Reddit, they were asking, how do I lock the shutter angle? And I don't think you can. You can change the dials for which dial. So if you find yourself bumping a certain dial, you can switch it to have a different function. But the other trick that I don't know, it's probably a good trick, but it's also kind of, I wish we could just lock it. They're saying, oh, put it in synchro scan mode. So that way when you bump it, you're only going 0.1 of a degree instead of the big, I think it's like 180 to 240 or 220, 210 maybe. There's a bigger amount you adjust that shutter angle, but if you put in synchro scan mode, you'll be like 180.3, 0.2, 0.1.
That is an option, I guess. I guess it's might as well. Yeah.
It's a little safety feature. It's not, like I said, it's not a good trick, but it is
I'm just more annoyed that the fact that I have to do something about it. I'm like, but I don't know. They try to make it easy to use by putting things everywhere, buttons everywhere. It's like dials everywhere, but it's like, well, I think less is more.
Yeah, I do prefer the top scroll compared to the button wheel, whatever you call
on
that.
The J6.
I'm just saying in general on cameras, like a top scrolling feels right to me for shutter. Maybe that's because I learned on Canon way back when.
Yeah, Canon was nice.
But I don't know why I want a wheel around the shutter release.
That feels awkward. I'm not sure.
That's more of like a Nikon thing, isn't it? I think they've done that a few times.
I can't speak on Nikon, really. I've never really operated those cameras.
That's what, back with the D600, I didn't like the layout. I thought Canon always had the best layouts for cameras, for photography, for hybrid, for whatever. And I was really glad to see that Lumix basically just copied them, I think. They said, oh, that worked. That looks good.
Great. Let's go with
We'll do that too. Apparently there wasn't a patent on button layouts. So.
Yeah, the G9 Mark II, the menu's great. It's like still the same
menu.
Like, Lumix menu's great. Panasonic.
I'm glad to see all the stuff like 4-channel audio, like all the stuff is still there. Yeah. I kind of expected there'd be something. I'd go in the menu and be like, oh, I can't do that anymore. Ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, you can do more, which is great. But yeah, GH7, hopefully. All that and some, hopefully. Hopefully it's not going to be like, oh yeah, we got you everything you wanted except for phase detect autofocus or whatever. We gave you NDs, but no autofocus.
You haven't had the G9 Mark II overheat, have you?
No.
I haven't seen this.
I haven't used it that long. I don't typically run my camera that long anyway because my battery, like I don't use like external batteries even. So
I was filming all morning today, probably for at least 4 hours.
Wow.
6 hours? I got to do the math on how long. It was like 5 hours. Recording pretty much the whole time. No heating. I mean, it was a colder day. It wasn't hot yet, but I didn't run into any issues. Running 5.8K.
Yeah.
So I've not run into this G9 Mark II overheating problem.
And you're shooting outside. Granted, it was cooler in the morning, I guess, nowadays, but
We'll see. If it overheats, I'll
Go back to the GH6. I
maybe
just shot what 6.5 hours straight, pretty much, a week ago on the GH6.
on the
It's
GH6.
fine, right? Internal fan, perfectly fine.
I've never had that camera overheat.
Yeah, it's a great camera. Sad to let it go. Maybe soon. Who knows?
Put it out to
We'll see.
pasture.
Yeah, I mean, I do like it. It's a great camera. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm gonna do a few more tests with the G9 Mark II, and then we'll see if I keep it or not. Because I still have to get cages for it and everything.
Oh, you're
have
not
to-
fully rigged out yet.
No.
Okay. Okay. Any final thoughts on the G9 Mark II?
I mean, it does what I wanted it to. But I will say the screen. I think the articulating screen is the one thing that I feel so privileged having the GH6, and now like I'm expecting to move forward with the G9, and I'm just like, man, like that's the one thing where I'm like, but we'll see. If the GH7, hopefully they announce it soon, because I'm ready to move on from the G9 Mark II already. Once the GH7 is announced, I'm ready.
Yeah, Lumix, I've always been very happy. They've had really good screens. They were some of the first, the Lumix cameras were some of the first to have the full flip around articulating, like the screen you would want.
Yeah.
And now that GH6 screen is just, it's even better than perfect. Just run those on everything.
Yeah. Oh wait,
Tilts up, tilt
before
to the
we
side.
go, you had mentioned that so like vlog shooting on GH6, we have to add a little bit more contrast in order to make it truly using like its whole range of I don't know,
Yes.
dynamic range. So for the G9 Mark II, you were saying it was a little bit better when applying the LUT.
So I haven't done enough to confirm this, but the GH6 was weird in that when you apply the LUT, it would basically take your shadows down to like, I don't know, 10, and your highlights maybe 5, I don't know, something on the waveform, right? And then your highlights up to like 95. Even if they were clipped, like a light bulb,
Right.
a bright light in the frame, you'd apply the LUT and take it up to 95. I'm like, why am I not going to 100?
Right.
So I had to set basically points on the curve to kind of move, okay, my highlights should be at 100, my shadow should clip at 0. That was it. The clipping point was set in this kind of smaller window. And I haven't seen that issue on the G9 Mark II, where it seems like when you apply the Panasonic LUT, it takes it to the full range. And I don't know if that's an odd quirk, if it's a difference in maybe like the LUT I'm using, maybe there's a newer LUT, maybe their intent is that it's not supposed to be the full range. I have to do a little bit more investigation, but I did notice that slight difference. And even the color between the GH6 and the G9 Mark II, people have said it's the same sensor, but the color and the way the camera's processing color is slightly different. When I was shooting some of those color chip charts, you'd see slight differences between the two. They're very easy to match. It's not hard, but they are slightly different.
Yeah.
Where I've shot, two GH6s side by side and they're identical.
Right.
If I have a GH6 and a G9 Mark II, they are slightly different in terms of color. So that's a little quirk. And then I don't know if there's any other quirks. No, the USB PD thing was really the big one that kind of got me, because that's been the one major difference I've noticed. Small, but kind of big.
Yeah, I think the battery issue that I've had more frequently is the DJI mics. So those kind of run out. The receiver runs out of battery, because it's nice. Like the pack has like 2 transmitters, which is great, because if one transmitter dies, it's like, great, I have another one, swap it out. But the receiver itself, the built-in batteries is the issue, because it's not like, you can swap out those batteries. So finding something that maybe I could, give that a little juice throughout the day. But that's the only thing I don't have a solution to, other than just buying another pack. But I feel like that's not the proper solution.
Kind of the downside, yeah. But I've juiced those up with the USB-C input when I've had to, and that does work.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just throwing it in the case and waiting, 15 minutes and letting it give it a little more juice. But
Yeah. Remind yourself to turn it off. The only other thing I was thinking that occurred to me, it came up earlier when you were talking about manual focus and some tricks to help you out. If people have made it this far, one final parting thought I will leave you with is, when you're shooting wide, a lot is in focus, or perceptibly, it looks like a lot's in focus. However, I find that it's often easier to be in focus at wider focal lengths when I'm shooting shallower, at like a 1.7. Some people,
It's easier to tell that you're in focus.
correct,
Is that what you're saying? Yes.
correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Some people will think, oh, well, I want to make sure I'm in focus, so I'm going to shoot at f4, f5.6.
Sure.
And on micro four thirds, that's pretty deep depth of field. And if you're shooting wide, like maybe at like a 10 or a 9, something like that, it'll all basically look like it's in focus.
Right.
However, it actually isn't all in focus, and it's easier to tell if you're actually in focus when you're shooting at a 1.7.
Yeah.
So for as much as people would say, oh, I stopped down, stopped up, I don't know, whatever you say, I'm going to shoot an f4 to make sure I'm in focus. I would recommend, if you're shooting manual focus, like a GH6 or something like that, I find it's actually a little easier to tell optically when you're able to shoot at like a f2. And you go, oh, okay, I see separation. I see difference. Versus like, yeah, it looks like it's good. I use peaking. I check my peaking. And there's just everything's speckled.
Red or blue or... Yeah.
Way easier to tell if you're shooting with a longer focal length because obviously the background looks a lot blurrier.
Yeah.
But it was wide.
Yeah, much like what you were talking about, like a rangefinder, just getting used to the lens that you're shooting with and just knowing like, okay, this is about the distance that, you know, and that's actually another thing on the GH6. When you are pulling focus, it does tell you, like it gives you a reading about where, you know, it is, you know, so you can kind of get a sense as, you know, you shoot more often or just even focus on something that might happen to be like, you know, 5 feet away, 6 feet away, 10 feet away, and just take a mental note probably, just like look down and be like, okay, that's about accurate. Or at least that's about as far as my subject would be from me. So just knowing kind of like where it should be, like, that'll maybe put you in the ballpark a little bit quicker. But I don't know. That's a little tip.
Yeah. Final manual focus trick is I see a lot of people, maybe they're newer. I don't know. They don't work at newer. They are newer to the craft. They'll use their hands, right, to focus and find focus, manual focus, you know, racking and doing all this kind of business. And then they're like trying to get, you know, like an eyelash or something small, microscopic, macroscopic, whatever you want to. They're focusing like this. Just lock it and then just move your body.
Oh yeah, that's
Just move your body, move the lens through the thing, and you can see it, and you don't have to try and fiddle so much because people fiddle, they're shaking the camera.
Yeah.
Just lock it and move the camera through the focal plane, the lens past your subject, and then you can find it. You know, oh, I want to get this bumblebee in focus. Okay, just pull the lens through.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, and it's like what we were talking about earlier with depending on the lens, like just moving it a little bit it'll look a lot worse basically.
Oh, it looks terrible.
It's gonna look a lot worse. So yeah, just moving your body ever so slightly in and out, it's gonna be a lot smoother overall. And then you can also just focus on your framing as well. So
Lock your focus and move it with yourself. That's like a pro tip. I feel like you figure out eventually.
Yeah.
But new people don't know that. They're thinking I have to focus with my fingers, my hands. I got to turn the ring.
Do a little parallax just from side to side.
Ooh.
Yeah, you can get crafty.
Get some good footage that way. All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear it. I'm hopeful for a GH7 with some advanced features, but the G9 Mark II does a lot of what I needed, and it's just kind of unfortunate that we had to wait so long for it because it was like the GH6 was sort of a stopgap to it.
Yeah, I would have liked having the phase detect in the GH6. I think it would have been like the perfect camera had it had phase detect, but it wasn't there yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll see what happens next.